So I gave a talk in San Francisco recently, and a lot of the photo slides that I have here are reused from there, and I didn't finish reorganizing all the slides at the beginning of this talk. But most of this talk is I specifically constructed over the course of the last frantic 36 hours of not sleeping for this meeting. I did get 2 hours of sleep last night. When I say last night, I mean 3 hours ago. So hopefully this will work out fine. I generally do talks on small amounts of sleep when I'm somewhat exhausted. All right. So kind of jumping into the beginning random slide portion of this, because nothing else, I think it's icebreaker. It's kind of entertaining. So Isla Vista, of course, we all know, has a kind of crazy party culture. This is a photo that I took recently of a bunch of people streaming out of an apartment at midnight. It's actually, there's a cop over here. Actually, I've got this thing, don't I?
Oh, wow.
That does, the laser pointer does not.
You guys you're spoiling them with my little paper sheets.
Well, it's actually, interestingly, this is so reflective that the laser pointer does not work on there. So yeah. So that cop is actually filming people coming out of that apartment. This is related, if you saw the article that Melinda Burns had put in The Independent about the police working with landlords in order to try to help with the party culture in Isla Vista. So these are some photos that I took in 2003. So this is a Halloween. This is, of course, people here are familiar with this, but I just find the sequence is so great. You think this might be an inner court of an apartment building. But in fact, this is the front of an apartment. I'm standing on the street. You might think that this is looking at the front yard as I take a step back, but in fact now this is the center of the street. People are crammed off into the distance. That is a street light in the distance as we are dealing with wall-to-wall people. Now, I say people here aren't surprised, but actually some people here might be, because the students who are here might not have experienced Halloween when it was as crazy as it was even only 10 years ago when I was here, much less when it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago with some of the people who were here. Okay, so just 20 years. Okay.
Well, 30 years younger.
Now, in order to get a picture of what the chaos was actually like, I say this is in the street. Streets have cars. Cars are driving through crowds of people in order to try to get from one side to the other. People are, of course, standing on cars, destroying them. People have actually constructed costumes that are effectively giant vehicles that they're just like throwing through the crowd. Hopefully it doesn't crash my computer, actually. In fact, it's not playing, it's concerning me. I'm just going to hope the sound when it's over. Okay. The video connection here, I don't think this computer is not really designed to drive this large of a television. So there was actually a video of people in a pirate ship costume shoving a massive thing through the crowd with people in front essentially yelling, "Get out of the way, get out of the way," as they were barreling through the streets. Now, people have been trying to make all of this safer, and so UCSB has put in a lot of, at the time, was putting in a lot of makeshift street lighting with generators at the bottom. Of course, we've seen the tents with police, the horses, groups of horses. Horses, part of the reason why my understanding is crowd control on streets. Now, this is not Halloween. This is just about a month ago on the streets of Isla Vista on a normal Friday. The same Friday, actually, that the party I took in. People are standing on the streets. We, of course, use streets like a massive thoroughfare. I mean, here's people walking a giant crowd through the intersection. I'm, of course, the only person on the sidewalk. I actually do tend to use the sidewalk, but I'm the only person on the sidewalk. People are very brazen in Isla Vista, walking through parades of police cars. But of course, we all know sort of why this happens. We don't actually have sidewalks in all of the areas of Isla Vista. Sidewalks just tend to bleed into nothing. They're not. They're not really designed for the kind of use case that people are using on those thoroughfares. But now you might say, well, okay, the problem is that the County Public Works Department is not dealing with this well enough. They're not building enough roads, they're not maintaining our roads well enough. I take a lot of photos, and I've been here for a long time. So I managed to actually, at some point, catch a photo of a couch burning. So the couch burnings that end up occurring in Isla Vista leave these massive scorch marks on the road that essentially destroy them. And they lead us to the situation where it's just almost unreasonable to be thinking about the repair process that has to be done to the roads until you think about changing the culture of people burning couches, which thankfully people have started doing. Things like the Give Fair have been really, really useful in that. But this is an example to me of the kind of situation where some of the infrastructural problems that we have are almost caused by culture problems, and you can try to patch them really quickly with infrastructure, but if you don't fix the culture, you can kind of get screwed. Jacob?
Didn't they start like charging people for air pollution violations over the couch burnings a few years ago, and that's like really clamped down on it a lot?
Hefty fines and undercover was part of it. And then I think peer pressure.
Yeah, the problem is, can you really figure out who's burning the couches? It's a complicated problem because by the time the couch burning is reported, it's because it's already aflame, at which point people are just standing around hooting at it. It's something where, yeah, undercover can help, but yeah, and so that's also something we're dealing with the police that we have here in order to organize them better around the problems that we have is very important, and so that's something I definitely agree with.
You have culture.
So I also have kept a bunch of daily nexuses from back when I was a student. And so I was flipping through them recently, and something actually while I was flipping through them, I was kind of sending some of them frantically to pictures of them frantically to Cameron because I just thought they were so awesome. So here we've got parking. This is 2002. The Chancellor's Special Advisory Committee will hold a public forum to present recommendations on parking issues today from 12 to 2 p.m. in the Houston Harbor Room, 2002. I went to the same meeting 3 months ago or whatever, only this time it was in Pardall Center. The issues here just kind of stay, and of course it's something that I think that we don't spend enough time talking about, which is in these meetings very specifically, which is the kind of difference in mindset between the students. I kind of want to say a lot of the students because they're kind of jumped together, but I'm not saying it bad. Between the students and a lot of the homeowners here in terms of what problems there are and what problems need to be solved. So here we've got County cancels IV islands. There was a project in order to put a bunch of islands as traffic calmers in order to increase the safety along Del Playa and Sabado Tarde, which was essentially shut down by a large group of students campaigning because each one of those islands would have taken up 8 parking spots. Now, the same kind of situation has come up recently in terms of the county looking at trying to solve certain problems in Isla Vista, such as the lack of sidewalk utilization, but then ends up causing parking contention issues, which then affect other people's lives. And so again, when I say, that's why I really want to make a point when I say that when I talk about students have some different issues, I'm not saying because students are wrong issues. I think this is actually an important issue for students. And the other issue is an important issue as well. But oftentimes, I don't think we spend enough time talking, almost I want to say even at each other sometimes, ironically as it is, about the areas that we actually disagree on, as opposed to the areas that we just kind of think we all disagree on. Which leads us to, I think the next one, yes, thankfully, density issues. So there's a lot of talk about the hatred of density and the issues with density. I look at density, honestly, please don't kill me, a little bit as an opportunity. Density is an opportunity in terms of planning in order to allow you to have mixed use, dense, commercial mixed with real estate, things that actually they were working on with some of the master plan. Density does cause problems, but density does not inherently lead to problems. Density is something that if you think about the problem beforehand, if you think about, if you make certain that you actually have enough police. People talk about we've doubled the population, we haven't increased the police. But somehow that sometimes turns into we need to decrease the population or keep the population from increasing, which of course is a really complicated mandate for the university to try to deal with because the university is supposed to be educating our people. When instead we could be trying to look at increasing the police force or trying to look at it in the other direction, trying to figure out ways of making the density safe and reasonable. So we have a lot of density in the area, which has also brought in things like 7-Eleven, which I always find a little bit surprising now walking by because it just seems so weirdly corporate in the sense. But actually, I don't know if you have gone into that 7-Eleven, but the 7-Eleven actually has a beer pong stand. The guy who runs it is here half the time, and he actually kind of tailors to this community. Now, maybe you still don't like 7-Eleven, and maybe I still don't like 7-Eleven in many ways, but I think it's also interesting that we still manage to maintain some culture even as we kind of bring in large things. Density leads to other kinds of parking issues. Density leads into bleeding issues into our surrounding community. This is actually in Goleta. The two-away zone is right outside my apartment continually with the various signs and things telling you about why you should not be parking there at any point. Leading to how we actually then try to deal with some of these large parties, which oftentimes ends up being both an attempt to construct a post hoc, well, the party is here, we will try to organize where the party goes approach, as well as a keep it local campaign. So this was from, of course, this year. If you probably recognize it, I think Yana might have been involved in making this. In 2003, I had actually forgotten. same thing. Here's essentially the same map, same campaign, and that's also something that I was here and I kind of forgot, because we a lot of the zeitgeist around this always seems to make it sound like there's a lot of new stuff that's going on trying to deal with some of these issues, but in fact we've been doing the exact same things for the last at least 13 years, and I believe much longer. There is a difference, though, which we'll get to in a second. So, 10 tips to keep it local, keep it safe. This is also a difference. This is something that, honestly, I was a little bit unhappy with. And so the current marketing message, keep it local, keep it safe, has got these beautiful waves and is trying to make Isla Vista look like a glorious place. But for a while, it was almost entirely about what you think will happen. You're texting your friends. What could happen? You're getting towed. Shots you think you'll take, mugshot you could take. What you want to wear, what you might wear. A lot of fear tactics. This image here in particular ended up making a lot of people very angry. And this is a throwback Thursday to people having a blast at Deltopia last year. Looks like lots of fun, huh? Hashtag sarcasm, hashtag not worth it, hashtag throwback Thursday, hashtag Deltopia, leading to a protest by the police brutality and Students Against Police Brutality Task Force or something like that, which is half run by the Black Student Union against this particular marketing campaign. And one of the issues that I have with it is that it kind of like spreads a little bit of hate. So this is actually an app called Yik Yak. I don't know, maybe students might know what it is, but I don't know if a lot of the people who are actually even my age and older, I did not know what this was until a reporter one day asked me to use Yik Yak. And so this is an anonymous app like Twitter. Just heard someone yell at an oot, out-of-towner. Get the fuck out of my town if you don't live here, lol, love it. And there was a lot of kind of hatred building around oots on Yik Yak, and there's also something even some of my friends were kind of like jokingly participating in, and I was like, please do not be so like mean to the people who are out of town. Not all of them are horrible. So a comment that I've been making for a while, all right, is that if we were in a startup and we were saying that we've got too many people showing up to our website keeps shutting down, this is a quality problem. This is a problem that I want to have. This is actually a slide. Almost every conference I go to, somebody has got this slide. Usually many people have this slide about quality problems. This is from XOXO, an independent creators conference. This is a problem I want to have. If you were to go to any other city and say you have a lot of people who are showing up somewhere else with nothing to do here, and so they end up getting destructive, they would look at you like you're crazy. Why don't you just give them something to do? Like, we spend all of our time coming. We've got a lot of things we think we have a lot of stuff here for people to do, and no one ends up showing up to our town. Why don't you fix this? Well, so in 2003, one difference is in the bottom right-hand corner of that Keep It Local campaign, we actually had Dia de Muertos Festival, Friday, October 31st. Now, I don't know, this is probably something that would not scale to the kinds of people who were coming, but this is something that I think is interesting, that they were still kind of tolerating having events on Halloween in Anascoyo. At some point they decided that no, this is actually not an approach that we're going to be taking. And I'd really love to get a better understanding of why. I don't know if some of you were here for that.
We did in 94, 95, 96, 97, I think those were the years, we did both children's events and big person events. You know, bands, costumes, fair stuff, dunk tanks, and children events also. And we did that for at least 3 to 4, possibly 5 years. And then funding became an issue, time became an issue, and we started cutting it down to just children's events that our recreation coordinator could do. But we did have permission from Foot Patrol for a good 4 years there to actually do events, to try to show an alternate thing.
Including street closing.
Yeah, we closed the loop, and we really tried to pull people off the thing, and yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was at least, it was awesome.
All right, so of course, these days we've been trying to bring some of the idea of having events on some of these things. The group that does Ivy First Friday has been really interested in this, and then of course got shut down essentially by the county changing the noise ordinance at the last minute to keep it from being able to actually run on Deltopia. It's kind of unfortunate. All right, so apparently I've managed to escape these random parts of my slides. So a lot of the slides, I generally do a lot more image slides like this, but because I'm trying to actually give a lot of information here, and I'm trying to actually not just say things as opposed to trying to demonstrate things, I've got a large number of text pieces that I've accumulated from taking pictures of various articles, taking screenshots of various articles. I've highlighted various relevant sections here. And hopefully I remember the order, although the very first couple here I'm not even certain, but it's here. So The committee has sent tens of thousands of pamphlets to campuses on the West Coast with the intent of discouraging potential partiers from coming this year. Now, this is from the Isla Vista Free Press in 1987. Which I think is the thing that really hits home about the same old strategy that we've been using. And so I will kind of make the argument that if we've been doing the exact same thing for the last 30 years and we're still unhappy with the results, maybe that is not the way to go. Which then leads, of course, some people agree with me in various ways. And so this is an opinion piece in the Nexus from 2003, How the Grinch Stole Halloween. I'm really happy, by the way, that the Nexus didn't keep all of the great imagery that they had their staff draw. If you go back through the archives, you only see the text. You don't get to see all of the beautiful illustrations that they ended up putting together. So on the bottom right-hand corner of the same page is an article that I wrote. Halloween could be fun if IV were a democracy. And I stand by most of what's in there still. I've come to have a much more nuanced opinion than I necessarily did back in 2003. Yeah, and so I was talking in 2003 about the past Isla Vista Cityhood attempts and the Isla Vista Community Council, and I ended with actually I think they cut it out of the paper version of the article entirely, didn't they? They had no clue what to do with Isla Vista, the people, yes. On the online version of it, they kind of reformatted the punctuation and made me very unhappy. I guess in the text version, they actually just removed it. Yeah, that being the slogan of the Isla Vista Community Council. All right, so all these crackdowns have led to something that I care about personally, which is the lack of free birds at 5 in the morning. So my understanding from talking to some of the business owners is that the crackdowns of both party culture in general and very specifically of Halloween in Deltopia has led to the very seasonal business cycle getting disrupted and making it so that the story that I heard is that on Halloween, of course, it was partly a rain day, which I think is next thing. But a lot of people are saying that I've been at Halloween when it was raining before, and I remember there being lots of people there. So it's not the rain that really causes. It really is there was a massive culture shift that would lead to things like the oops comments on Yik Yak that they finally managed to accomplish this year, which again makes me happier in other ways. But Mike from Ivy Deli Mart was telling me that Hana Kitchen threw out 100 pounds of chicken on Halloween because they anticipated a normal amount of food that they would end up selling, and they ended up selling nowhere near that much. All right, so then I've also got these things sprinkled through here as collage slides. So this is something that Supervisor Peter Adams said during the meeting this last week. I, too, have a large unincorporated population, so I understand these challenges. I'm frankly a little bit conflicted on this. I think AB-3 could discourage the formation of a city, which I really think is the proper governmental structure that has the police powers that are really answerable to the local citizens. And I'm afraid that if we go down this route, it could be kind of a distraction for a very long period of time. Formation of any entity should definitely go through LAFCO, in my opinion. All right, which leads to now talking more about the county and some of the things that they do. So this is a meeting that was in this room 3 months ago. I think Jenny was there. This was a meeting about lighting on the west end of Isla Vista. And I think the amazingly ironic thing about this, I remember we were having all these meetings. We were talking about problems, and we were talking about lack of lighting as one of the most serious problems that we're dealing with. How we need more lighting, We actually had the meeting, and then we were having people arguing about less lighting. And this meeting was almost entirely about less lighting. And it makes sense, because if you suddenly have a light outside your window that is essentially shining into your window because the people who put it together did not put the nice little canopy on it that keeps the light from going off into the houses instead of being directed on the street. Or they end up buying the version of the LED that is the ludicrously blue one, ironically, as I am involved in Blue Night. The ludicrously blue one as opposed to the nicer yellow shade that actually allows you to sleep at night. So this was a sometimes tense meeting, given how small it was. They actually ended up really liking me because I said, I'm just here in order to watch. I'm not going to be complaining about anything. So they run County Service Area 31's lighting division. They're part of the the sewage, water, utilities division of the county. So CSA-31, when it was founded in 1983, had this clause in it. And so this also, I spent a lot of time doing a lot of research on CSA-31, so that's one of my goals here to explain some of this. That the extended county services to be provided to the proposed county areas are 1, street lighting, 2, police protection, 3, installation, maintenance, and repair of sidewalks, curbs, and gutters, 4, planting, maintenance, and care of street trees. So again, County Service Area 31 is a dependent special district to the county. The board of CSA-31 is the County Board of Supervisors. The County Board of Supervisors occasionally meets as CSA-31. They essentially never meet as CSA-31, by the way, because they don't really have anything decisions that they make as a board. Essentially, everything is done by staff, and then occasionally they just check the budgets. This is something that got brought to our attention during one of these meetings, and it was kind of important for a little while, but it turns out it's not. So in 2009, the County Service Area Law got entirely rewritten and made it so that all of the powers that CSAs have had to get reviewed by LAFCO in order to get, as part of their municipal service review, and then they all got replaced. So in 2009, the LAFCO checked what they currently had as the powers of CSA-31, and they initially were like, okay, it's street lighting and acquisition of open space in conjunction with a redevelopment agency. They decided, however, that CSA-31 wasn't really doing this. And so they changed it initially. The staff requested provides street lighting and street tree watering. Then, and this is the part that was really complicated to track down because the minutes were miserable at the time. They didn't actually, so they kept these drafts, but they didn't keep any of the final resolutions on the website. So the final resolution actually added street lighting, installation, maintenance and repair of sidewalks, curbs and gutters and planting, maintenance and care of street trees. So this is what we now know of as CSA-31, and whenever we sit around and we talk about CSA-31, we talk about this thing that's doing street lighting, sidewalks, and then street side landscaping. All right. So now I'm going to, every year, CSA-31, okay, so CSA-31 is funded by a benefit assessment. The benefit assessment is levied as a multiplier of a base tax rate against the kind of building you have. So if you have a commercial building, you are thought to be gaining more benefit from street lighting and streetscaping than if you have a apartment complex, or that if you have a apartment complex, you're getting more benefit than if you have like a residential duplex. And so they've got this multiplier for all these different types of areas. The base rate is set, so like a vacant lot is 1/2 the base rate the way they currently set it up. The base rate in 2008 was $8. The maximum that they are allowed to set, which is part of when they founded CSA-31, then the people voted on it. They voted on the maximum amount of tax they'd be willing to pay. The maximum is $12.93. And they are not allowed to increase it past there, even for inflation. They did not add any kind of cost of living increase into the CSA-31 construction. But again, in 2008, they had it at $8. CSA-31 was, at the time, they were just still in the process of doing the replacement of how it was founded. It was established by Resolution 23685, primarily provides street lighting. So this presentation was given to the Board of Supervisors by the staff of CSA-31 in 2009. Southern California Edison owns and maintains the street lights. I think that's something that's also really interesting to know about CSA-31 is that they don't actually do even any of the work. They simply contract to Edison in order to do the work. They're not even allowed. At the meeting we were talking about with all the little shades, they were saying, well, we have a menu of options of what we're allowed to do for you from Edison. We can tell the Edison if we like it. Maybe if we want something outside there, we can kind of ask them politely. But Edison is the people who actually do all of that work. CSA-31 pays for energy and maintenance costs. Only 25% is attributable to electricity. Other extended services, at the time still, include police protection, installation, maintenance, and repair of sidewalks, curbs, gutters, and street trees. They then did a projection of the budget, the fund. So CSA-31 has a fund stored at the county, which at the time actually still had over like $150,000 in it. They've been burning through the funds, and so they decided, okay, we're now looking at a situation where in another like 4 or 5 years, we're not going to really have enough money anymore. So, and they got other things that they claimed that they hoped to be, and I thought Adopt a Block was run by Goleta West Sanitary.
It is Goleta West. I don't think we get anything from.
Yeah, so I'm really actually I talked to Marty today, and I forgot to ask him this question about why Adopt a Block was on here, but he might not even know because I don't think Marty was working there at the time.
Yeah.
But Adopt a Block was listed in 2009 as other existing services of CSA-31. So they then were talking about how the various roadway improvements, mostly I believe by the RDA and the various other actual development that was going on, will add new street lights. And so the new street lights are going to make it a lot more expensive, and that means that they are proposing increasing the rate back up to $12.93. Now, that said, I believe that still is not actually succeeding in solving their budget, which we can see in 2010. So they got their $12.93. Now we're looking, we see just the figures here. So the property tax, so CSA-31 also gets part of the ad valorem property tax. They get $16,000, benefit assessment of $33,000, total revenue about $50,000. Their expenses, $52,000 in street lighting. They also did streetscape maintenance, which my understanding is marked in the fund as medians, weeding, and watering. I actually called Marty today, asked him, because I keep bringing this up to people, and they're like, we don't have any medians. And I still need to talk to Mark Paul about this, who's actually the person in charge of this particular thing. Administration costs, total expenses, shortfall that they were experiencing already. And by the way, I don't know why they use Isla Vista Citizens History as the image in these presentations, but they love using that book as like the, the clip art. Which then was showing them they projected by 2016, even with the $12.93, they were going to end up in deficit. Now, this is the status that we've essentially been hearing about from CSA-31 forever, which is that CSA-31, even at the maximum amount of money that they're able to obtain, is continually in deficit. So, but because they're able to go until 2016, the way that these county service areas work, they're like, we're fine. We'll just continue to watch. 2011. All right, so we've now got $15,033, same thing. $50,000 street lighting costs are, I think that's actually lower than last time, although maybe I'm misremembering because I'm maybe misremembering the total expenses there. Still have a shortfall, still projecting issues with the fund, although they're kind of pushing forward the date a little bit because things got a little cheaper. Although they've got different versions of this document that were like, this one was 2,000 less. I don't know. They seemed almost confused about the amount of money they have. All right, staff is monitoring the fund. Okay, we keep going. It's 1293, remains unchanged since 2008. Now, I included in this set of slides the North County Lighting District. So the North County Lighting District also is run by the same people. And the North County Lighting District has actually not needed any money since 2008 because they've just had a lot of money available, that fund. And, and no change in rates are proposed this fiscal year. They had a previous version of this presentation that explains, I think, CSA is a little bit better. The NCLD benefit assessment set to $0 in fiscal year 2008 to reduce the fund balance. Like, they actively set it to $0 in order to reduce the fund balance because they have a fund, they accumulate money into this fund. The fund pays for services that the county service area has. If the fund gets too much money in it, they're supposed to decrease the amount of the benefit assessment in order to keep the fund at a reasonable level. And then as the fund dips below some emergency threshold where they think they need money in the course of some near period of time, then they will increase the benefit assessment back up. So continuing here to deal with adopt resolution establishing street lighting changes for CSA-31, but that was just changing what they were going to spend, like I think the expenditures, not the, they kept it at $12.93. 2013, we got a break. The IVRDA dissolution resulted in additional property tax revenues to CSA-31. They also started doing community development block grants to retrofit the street lighting. This is something I talked to people at CSA-31 about. And they made the point that community development block grants aren't supposed to be used to do street lighting. So we actually have a lot to thank to Doreen for arguing and succeeding in getting us that money. Apparently the issue, normally, I asked him, how do you normally get street lights? And he's like, oh, street lights normally happen when you get a developer to come in to rebuild a building. And you tell them you're not allowed to get the permit for that unless you put a street light. But we don't have enough of that going on, so we don't get, and when they built everything initially, it was a long time ago and they didn't care enough, and so we didn't get any of the street lights that we probably should have had. And so they've instead had to use community development block grants in order to retrofit retrofit the existing poles and even to build the new street lights that they've been adding along Camino Mallorca and Estero. Proposed benefit assessment, unchanged, fund balance. But now we've got this cool property that we're actually doing fine. So property tax revenue funds, hardscape and landscape improvements. The street lighting benefit assessment, because of the way that they set it up, it's based on how much benefit you get from their district. It funds street lighting operation and maintenance only. The grants are being used to retrofit the street lighting. Unchanged recommendations, still not. I think we've actually got, they actually make this very explicit here somewhere. I should have taken a screenshot of the board letter, but the board letter makes it clear that they're actually doing fine now. So they've increased the amount of property taxes they get thanks to the RDA dissolving has gone up by $35,000. That kept for 2 years. People were telling me, but that's just temporary from the RDA. That kept for 2 years, and it went down a little bit this year. I asked Marty about it. Marty says that it went down not because the amount of money they're going to get from the RDA in the future is going down, but because they finally figured out what they're doing as far as debt servicing for the redevelopment agency, and so they're taking back some money temporarily, but we're going to get all that back. So we're looking at a drastic increase in amount of money going to CSA-31, which then leads to a $15,000 to $20,000 surplus every year instead of a $10,000 shortfall. At some point, we're going to end up in a situation where CSA-31 is going to now no longer need as much money, and so they're going to need to lower the benefit assessment. So an argument that I've been making is, exactly what I'm hearing whispering about, is that CSA-31 is actually empowered to run a municipal advisory council because of the law change in 2009 that made it so that the powers that the initial resolution had are no longer relevant. Now what you need to do is you need to go and ask LAFCO for any power a CSA can have, and all of them are considered latent powers. Now, I'm not certain who has to ask that. It might be because it's a dependent special district, the County Board of Supervisors has to ask that. But it's, I think, an interesting opportunity that right now there's a tax that we're getting money from that we don't have anything useful to spend it on because CSA-31 has actually put in all the street lighting that they wanted. And they did it using the development block grants as part of the 4-phase lighting plan. We've heard that the maintenance of that is increasing, but according to the board letter, the maintenance is actually only increasing negligibly and that it's not affecting their funds. So CSA-31, I keep making the comment that, like, on the one side, we should be asking the Board of Supervisors to ask them for ask LAFCO for MAC powers. On the other side of AB-3, I kind of think you should dissolve CSA-31 and fold it into the Community Services District. I will almost argue to protect the funds. Because you can continue to use the property tax for random things, but you can't use the benefit assessment for random things, and so they're going to lower the benefit assessment to deal with this.
But Jay, when all the street lights are built out, isn't there going to be a higher operational cost?
Supposedly, according to, and I wish I actually screenshotted the board letter. No, they're putting in street lights that require less maintenance because they're LEDs. They burn out less often and require less electricity. For the same amount of brightness, and so even though they're adding new streetlights, it's apparently only a very negligible increase in the amount of money that's required to maintain the streetlights. So we've essentially been hearing a lot of random rumors that I think have just been rolling over since 2011, 2012 with relation to the status of CSA-31. It's actually I actually, when I was talking to Marty a few weeks ago, I said to him that people are saying that you are strapped for cash, that your main problem is you don't have enough money to do the things, and he's like, I have no clue why people would say that. And there's also the experience, I asked Doreen, because people who were here a few weeks ago, I was very upset at myself that I missed the meeting where CSA-31 was going to be asking for, every year not asking the County Board of Supervisors to try to increase the benefit assessment by doing a vote of the property people, the benefit vote. And I asked Doreen about it, like, why doesn't CSA-31 ever request more money? And she's like, well, they don't need more money. She just said that. So, all right. Yeah.
You know, I also talked to some people, CSA-31 people, and it's absolutely correct that because they're not only adding new lights, but they're retrofitting lights that they have, they're converting them to the LED. Because they're converting them to LED, each light is going to take less electricity, and because of the LED lights are more efficient, they can maybe use one LED light when they were using 2 sodium vapors before. So those costs, you know, depending upon how electricity rates in general behave, are the reason why, at least for now, the increased electrical costs are negligible.
All right. So I actually don't. This is just a leftover slide from some other stuff that I failed to delete a couple slides in the middle of all these images. All right, so this, by the way, I left these slides in here because this is graffiti abatement. This sign, sadly, and it's also kind of difficult to see, but this sign sadly ended up getting some graffiti on it at some point. You can see the remnants of the graffiti. People. This is actually, I think after the graffiti was fixed. But the sign also, I don't know if. Just in the last year, because I started trying to find all the photos I could find of the sign. Somebody actually ripped half the sign apart. Just in the last within the last I think 10 months, if less than that. So graffiti abatement is awesome. I would love to get graffiti abatement, but also people point out that graffiti abatement costs $2,000 a year. We're trying to get
7,000, and we usually get 5, so we're generally scrambling for 2.
Yeah, so the 2,000 we're short
always,
2. Yeah,
we're short 2 out of the 7.
And so there's not much money you can really spend on graffiti abatement. It'd be kind of cool if we asked for something like even the $2,000 could come from CSA-31 or something. And so there's short-term fix for this particular problem. And it's also, I think, much more related to its existing services than you might, if you think about it, graffiti abatement versus street side landscaping and stuff, it feels similar enough in goal, and I think it's the same, it's a utilities issue, so. All right, so community center issues. I just thought this sign is awesome. I don't know if people here, so this was brought by the food co-op at the, I think it was at Earth Day. And I was really glad that they had this. This is the original sign of the Isla Vista Community Service Center, opened in the fall of 1970. I don't really have anything to say about it. Add to the Isla Vista Medical Clinic meeting that we had all had here. Not here, but this was at the which of the churches? I'm actually but it's no longer the Korean church, is it? It's University Methodist. I always forget what they renamed the church to. Meaning what we're going to use this community center building for. At the time, we were talking always about this one, and I know that now that a lot of conversation has shifted to talking about that one, but that's kind of sad. All right, so this I think would have connected better at the CSA-31 stuff. So municipal advisory councils. Now this is something that the people who like municipal advisory councils will hate me for just a little bit, but probably hopefully not that long, because actually I think it's going in a good direction here. So municipal advisory councils, June 1977. I always bring back to this thing here. Those interviewed at both the MAC and the county level complained of the lack of communication. MAC members said that frequently, this is about the Isla Vista MAC. MAC members said that frequently they had not been notified of available state and federal funds, and that only once had the board solicited its advice. They were frustrated because the board, they said, did not listen to the MAC. Those interviewed at the county level felt that the MAC had not provided the county with summarized informational input. Communication with the MAC is irregular and shows no general strategy. Board members do not receive a legislative packet or a score sheet of their performance on questions involving Isla Vista, though they do receive the regular MAC newsletter. The County Road Department, Department of Parks and Recreation, and the Planning Commission consult the MAC, but other county departments do not. In July 1973, the local supervisor, James Slater, requested the county administrative officer to require county departments to supply the MAC with information on decisions affecting Isla Vista. Although the county administrative officer sent out a memorandum, this process has never been fully implemented. The Isla Vista MAC has been successful in creating a form of participatory democracy within a community lacking other general government organizations. Monthly town meetings and a regular newsletter delivered to each resident promote communication. The MAC has achieved a few dramatic successes with the county supervisors, including the formation of the Isla Vista Park and Recreation District. It's wrong, right? Nevertheless, the council continues to face several political problems. Because of the relatively conservative political makeup of the Board of Supervisors and the relatively liberal nature of Isla Vista, the MAC's recommendations are seldom followed. Many board members place less importance on Isla Vista sentiments than on those from other areas in the county because of the Isla Vistans' transient student status. This transient nature of the community has led to a lack of continuity in leadership. As MAC members have become frustrated, they have tended to make demands on the Board of Supervisors rather than advise them. As one MAC member put it, since the county does not give the MAC legitimacy, the community does not give the MAC legitimacy, and vice versa. There's a problem that happens when you have a body that is advisory only and the County Board of Supervisors is not on your side, which can happen sometimes. Like right now, we've got Doreen. Doreen is awesome, and I bet Doreen would, if we had a MAC, it's not clear that Doreen actually has been fighting for us to have a MAC, by the way, but if we actually had a MAC, I bet Doreen would listen to it. But what happens when Doreen leaves or when the county gets reorganized, which is something that has been brought up by Jacob by one of the meetings earlier. So we can then look at the funding, because this is why we connected well with the CSA-31 stuff. The budget here is actually listed $25,000 grant from the University of California Region, $7,050 from the County General Fund, $8,000 from federal CETA program. I highlight this because a lot of times people ask where was the funding going, and they actually had listed where some of the funding for the MAC was going in this old document. But I managed to find another document. So, Choices for the Unincorporated Community. I sent this to Jonathan and Cameron. A Guide to Local Government Alternatives in California, copyright 1981. So we can fast forward by 4 years, and we can get a little bit of a better picture here. And the thing that so we've got, by the way, Isla Vista, same kind of thing, 4 CETA employees. Goleta had a MAC. As far as I can tell, Goleta had a MAC for 2 years. I haven't had a chance to go yet into the library's archives and pull all the records for it, but apparently they've got a box of stuff from those 2 years from the Goleta MAC. Middle-class suburban community, previous rapid growth had been slowed by voter-approved ban on new water hookups in effect since 1972. Research industry, a major employer. Subjects of MAC attention, park fees, airport expansion, planning for disposition of school sites, traffic conditions. Incorporation is an unofficial goal. Growth is a major issue, but general plan update was completed with community participation before MAC established, and then the next year, both their MAC and the Isla Vista MAC got dismantled. Unfortunate. So we can also look at this document explains about where funding is used for and where it comes from. Support services like secretarial help, money for postage, and access to professional planning services are necessary in order for a MAC to respond adequately to requests from the county or community for policy positions and recommendations. So like you ask, like, why does the MAC need people? And that actually made sense to me, is that if they're actually going to be a voice of the people that's official, they're going to need to be able to communicate with them by sending them mail. They're going to have to actually, if you go to you contact them, there needs to be a person you can contact that you can actually like make certain you can actually contact. Since they do not have governmental revenue-raising powers, most MACs do not have their own budgets. They function with a combination of help from community volunteers and from county or district staff. Several have Comprehensive Employment and Training Act grants from the county for clerical help. That's CETA. The establishment of a county services area specifically for MAC support had been anticipated by some MACs and was permitted by the 1978 legislation, but Prop 13 eliminated the formation of any new districts, which would increase the property tax rate. A MAC district would be limited to revenue from a fee, and none has been established since Prop 13. But so they had actually kind of anticipated that you would use the county service area mechanism in order to fund a MAC, but you couldn't construct. We happen to have a community services area that has a little bit of extra funding in it. Lucky us. But on the other side, the East Palo Alto MAC and I think this is the other side, maybe it's the next page, and the Santa Barbara County MACs receive allocations from the County General Fund. The East Palo Alto MAC operates much like a county department in charge of running a city. It has its own local building, governs 2 county service areas, and is administered federal grants to the community amounting to several $1 million. Ivy and Goleta in Santa Barbara County are each allocated $6,000 from the county budget, and Ivy also receives $11,000 from the University of California Regents. So this is something that Gain's been talking about some, is that you can have a municipal advisory council kind of run a MAC. It's kind of like a baby city. But this actually, I think, ties in with the people who like AB-3, ties in really well with the community services district. So this document talks about something called a county town, a way of effectively organizing both representation and authority for an unincorporated community. The term was coined to describe a combination municipal advisory council, community services district, area planning commission. One board is locally elected to serve also as both the MAC and the CSD Board of Directors. It is appointed by the Board of Supervisors to serve as the Area Planning Commission. A county board may, of course, designate any existing MAC as an APC for its jurisdiction. As MAC, it acts as liaison to the county and vehicle for unified recommendations governing services and community problems. As CSD Board, it administers services and levies and collects fees. As APC, it governs local planning decisions subject to appeal to the county board. The Sacramento LAFCO has suggested such a composite for this. Although there is little experience in which to learn, the MAC-CSD or MAC-CSD-APC combination seems to be an alternative with potential for widely varied functioning. A county town could, for example, as a MAC, develop a growth management or economic development plan, then as an APC, zone land and grant permits accordingly, subject to appeal by the County Board of Supervisors. Finally, as a CSD board, it could provide for the services such as the plan might require. Money for staff could come from the taxing authority of the CSD. So this to me is like the steel man version. If you talk about like this concept of like a straw man version of an argument where you've got something that like, you can try to knock down easily. This to me is the steel man version of the CSD. It's like when I think of it as a mechanism to fund a MAC in order to get the things that we want, such as actual control over things, subject to appeal to the County Board of Supervisors. All right, so and they've got another section here. One possibility, though not yet tried, is a kind of county town, a combination of 3 structures discussed in earlier chapters: an area planning commission to provide input on local land use preferences, a municipal advisory council to serve as general voice of the community, and county-provided services through 1 or more dependent districts, such as county service areas. So I bring this up in order to say, but you don't have to do the CSD route. If we have a CSA and we have money for it, you can also do that. Such a combination could meet communities' demands for services, representation, and centralized accountability if the Board of Supervisors, whose sponsorship is required, supports the concept. And they consider a variation on this combination substitutes for the dependent district or districts and independent multi-purpose districts such as a CSD. Locally elected is also authorized by the board to act as the MAC and ABC. 6. Success depends on 2 major ingredients: the County Board of Supervisors' willingness to grant genuine representative status to the local body, and adequate funding sources for desired services other than ad valorem property tax. And currently, the closest thing that we really have, this slide would work a little better earlier, is like, the Isla Vista Community Network, which is essentially a bunch of, and I got the picture, with the art in the background. Yeah, this is the most glorious of the shots. And a bunch of people who are just volunteering their time. But then again, if you try to contact the Isla Vista Community Network, it's not really clear who you would contact, and they don't really have even the money to tell people that they're doing anything, and they don't even try to make a decision, much less have anyone who can make a decision to on most topics.
It does feel like you're part of a cool club.
I love the club, though. It's an awesome club.
It's a benefit.
Yeah, so it'd be awesome if we could make this official and give it funding through a CSA or a CSD. So, back to County Supervisor Peter Adam at the meeting this last week. Just one final thought. Just focusing on the self-governance and local control without accountability and responsibility is just a false choice. We've got to have the ability for the citizens of that area to make decisions that stick instead of depending upon coming back into our board and potentially getting overturned all the time, or coming back and having to beg for financing. I would be willing to watch and see how it gets amended and see if it works in the end on AB-3. We actually, so Pegeen and I went to that meeting and actually asked the county, can you say any of the things that AB-3 wants? Can you say you'll give it to us, like that you want us to have it? Not that you want us to have AB-3, but can you tell us you want us to have a municipal advisory council, an area planning commission, you want us to run a parking district as opposed to you running it? Because it's clear that they kind of want to have a parking district, but it's not clear they want us to run it. Can we actually get them to tell us that they want us to have these things? And the closest we got to anyone even mentioning any of the services was Peter Adams saying that they can overturn the decision that we make. I think this is something you really have to pay attention to, and this is something that, again, this is the challenge that I've made to the process, is to get somebody. I think it really needs to come as an official board action, but even somebody on the board saying, hey, I would love to actually see you guys have these things. In fact, the closest that we tend to get is people saying that they would like us to have a city. So I've been working on this map. Some of you have seen this map, and so I actually don't remember why this map. We'll see what this map is about in another slide from now. I think, though, it's about, is all of the blue areas are where all of the all of the live-in homeowner exemptions are. You'll note that it's now a very small number of blue houses that are distributed mostly over on the left side. Almost everyone in this community is renting. That's right, rental issues. So, what's this?
Diane,
oh yeah. So I've been getting a bunch of random newspaper clippings from other people. So these come from Constance Brown, who she owns. She's this house here on Afrigo. She rents it out to people in the sense that she has 4 or 5 units, and so she lives in one of them and she rents the other. So she actually lives there. Constance has been here for a long time. It's actually she's one of the people who go around herself ablating graffiti. And for a while trying to fight for people to give the $2,000 that were needed back in the mid-'90s in order to actually get the graffiti ablated. So this was great. Isla Vista bedroom battle, housing puzzle is many pieces. Landlord with illegal bedrooms. I'm filling a need and providing the best housing in Isla Vista. Parks Board member. They are ripping off the community, putting the burden on those who have been honest. Father of a UCSB senior who rents an illegal bedroom. I'd like to punch somebody in the nose. A real bedroom community. There is an apparent pattern of illegal construction and bedroom conversions by many landlords in Isla Vista, according to a news press investigation of county building and tax records. So they did some investigative reporting, which is kind of awesome. So this is the floor plan as registered with the county of a building, which is supposed to have 2 bedrooms. It has 2 bedrooms in it, bedroom 1, bedroom 2, both on the 2nd floor. What they actually found when they went in there is that the dining room was being used as a bedroom, and they had constructed a 3rd floor loft, which in many cases here is barely enough room in order to sit up. Ladder leads to loft bedroom 4, loft bedroom 5. Now, actually, I gave this presentation, this was one of the slides I used in my talk in San Francisco. I hadn't read this little blob here yet, which makes it so much better. It was permitted, not pictured, is the rear 2-story unit. It was permitted for 1 bedroom, but was evidently converted into a 6-bedroom apartment, mostly by loft constructions and conversions of a dining room and storage room. The bottom line, the landlord now has 8 unpermitted bedrooms, bringing in additional rent.
I love the ingenuity.
Yes. Ingenuity. And it comes. This doorway was cut through a county-required firewall between 2 first-floor units at 6570 Cordova Road. The door allows residents of one unit to use a walled-off part of the other unit's living room as a bedroom. People who don't know what a firewall is, if you have an apartment and a fire happens in your apartment, you'd like that fire to not burn down the entire building very quickly, spread to everywhere, and you'd like it to be able to maybe there's enough time for the firemen to come and try to take out just take out the fire in one place. So that's why sometimes you'll see in like television shows of like some kind of like skyscraper in New York where like a fire happens and somehow that apartment has just been burned to a crisp and the ones surrounding haven't. It's because of these firewalls that divide the various apartments. And so they just cut a hole through the firewall in order to rearrange what bedrooms are being used where. All right. Student housing crunch tempts owners. Conventional wisdom says UCSB provides a perpetual oversupply of tenants, creating demand. And so this is a picture of the housing forum that was here at the Pardall Center. And so this was a situation where some people were being evicted from, actually I don't remember where it was now. My brain's not working. Abrega Villas. They were looking at, the Alvin tenant unit was fighting on their behalf in order to get the relocation benefits that they were supposed to be getting for that eviction. All right. So something that comes up constantly then when we talk about trying to get any kind of government here is we talk about property owners and concern about rent control. So by the way, actually, I wish I had done this. If I had done this like 2 days earlier, I would have succeeded. I actually tried to get Eckert here because I actually find that having Eckert around is least interesting. So anti-Cityhood group warns of rent control danger. It's all about Eckert. In an earlier mailing this summer, Eckert, a Goleta attorney, claimed the Isla Vista voting bloc of transient students would not mix well with the supposedly more mainstream political interests of Goleta. But the alleged threat of Goleta rent control is a new issue in Gaines, Goleta events, Goletans against incorporation now, continuing to move to defeat incorporation. Eckert, and by the way, thank you so much, Lanny. This article came from Lanny. Eckert writes, you and I will almost immediately be fighting an expensive rent control battle similar to that which was recently fought in Santa Barbara. I point out that if we become a city, it would take only about 4,500 signatures to place a rent control initiative on the ballot, and I remind you that there are 14,000 voters in Isla Vista alone. So this is 1987, and that's very important. This is 1987. Strategies for Fighting Rent Control at the Local Level, a handbook produced by the Local Governmental Relations Committee and the Property Management Committee for January 2002. So if you own a lot of property and you hate the idea that people want rent control, you read, this is like a handbook about like how to even try to do grassroots marketing to make people think rent control is bad. Like this is just all about how to not deal with rent control. Put out by the California Association of Realtors. And it points out something that's really important. California Civil Code 1954-50, created by Senator Jim Costa and Assemblymember Phil Hawkins in 1995, under Costa-Hawkins, rents may be raised to market value when tenants moved out. The law also provides an exemption for single-family residents at all new construction past 1995. You're actually not allowed to have rent control on buildings built after 1995. And the specific thing is the de-control of rents that happens when tenants move out. We live in an environment where almost everyone moves out constantly. Even if you were to try to set up a master tenant situation like you have in San Francisco, where like, well, as long as one person is still there, it sort of is still the same thing. But it's like one person from the original set, not one person as they rotate through. People leave after 4 years. The amount and the amount that you're actually able to hamstring a property owner by having rent control in California is actually really limited now and is almost irrelevant. I don't actually think that this should be like we and that's why actually I would love to hear Eckert's argument against why I'm wrong. But
Jay, hey, one question on that.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's not just 4 years, but the point is because people move every year.
Well, usually every year. Yeah, no, it's just like, but like I was just saying, like in San Francisco, there's a setup where if you've got like somebody moves in and they're considered the master tenant, and they can kind of like sublease to other kind of random people temporarily while they're still there. But as soon as all of the people who are the master tenants leave, a new lease has to get constructed, which causes Costa-Hawkins to come into play again. So even if you were to try to play that game, because I know sometimes people will like keep an apartment throughout multiple like years with their friends, you're going to get hamstringed by the 4 years of eventually people are going to leave. And so, were you about? No. So what I had originally been advocating for is, in order to try to deal with the rent issues, is something like the rent board in San Francisco. That was the meeting that we had had a long time ago. We were all kind of throwing ideas on the wall. I threw out the rent board like what San Francisco has. This is what the rent board allows you. So the rent board, one of the big things is you can go to the rent board and you can petition for a rent decrease. Now, the things you can petition for a rent decrease are the following list. If decreased housing services, reduction in base rent when the landlord has substantially decreased the tenant's housing services without corresponding decrease in rent, or failed to provide a housing service reasonably expected under circumstances, failure to repair and maintain, unlawful increases in rent, Excessive rent claims by subtenants. This is if you're a subtenant of somebody else and the other person is, like the person you're subleasing from is not paying the rent, and now somebody's demanding you pay the rent, but it's not really your responsibility because you're subleasing. Most of the situations here, you're not allowed to subletters anyway. So, financial hardship. If a landlord's petition to increase a tenant's rate based on capital improvements, etc., cause a financial hardship for the tenant may file an appeal. These are not horrible situations. This is not the same kind of thing as saying that from now on you're not going to be able to. The sun's horrible, isn't it? From now on, I'm watching Darcel, and she's got this horrible look on her face, but it's just because the sun is like screeching into her eyes. These aren't horrible situations. This is not the kind of thing where I think a lot of I think you'd almost have to be a very frustrating and irritating landlord in order to dislike these. Now maybe we have some of these in the area, but all right. Charges for services. Oh yeah, instead, however, what almost immediately this all got turned into us talking about is the rental housing mediation task force, like what downtown Santa Barbara has. So downtown Santa Barbara provides, by the way, residents of the city of Santa Barbara, they provided face-to-face mediations, telephone mediations, information on rights and responsibilities, and staff consultations. Now, all of the services except for face-to-face mediations are also provided to Goleta. And all of the services given to Goleta, except for telephone mediation, is provided to the unincorporated areas of Santa Barbara. So that's one of the reasons why it's like, oh, look, they're already providing services here. We can contract with them for maybe not that much and get them to provide us face-to-face mediation or telephone mediation. So what is mediation? I say this because I think a lot of people are confused about what mediation actually is. And this actually comes from the Rental Mediation Task Force. This is a chart: mediation, arbitration, litigation. Litigation is where you eventually end up in court over an issue, which is expensive for everybody, and no one really particularly likes going to court. Arbitration is where you have essentially, it's kind of like a cheap version of court, where you, instead of having a jury, even like you might request, or just a judge in like a small claims court, you have an arbiter whose goal is it's binding. Their decision is binding, but you're sitting around a table having what's hopefully a more pleasant conversation about things with the arbiter. Mediation is where there is nothing that is being binding. A mediator is you're having an argument and you'd like to stop yelling at each other. So you go to a therapist, and the therapist says, okay, let's try to stop yelling at each other. Let's understand your differences. Let's see why you think one thing and the other person thinks something else, and maybe you can come to an agreed upon resolution between yourselves. They can't do anything. Who are the mediators? So 2012, September, all of the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force minutes are available. Not all of them. I tried really hard to scrape a lot of them. Newly appointed mediator, Charles Eckert III, landlord. Charles Eckert provided a brief history of his background, which included over 50 years as an active member of the California State Bar. Further, Charles has been an active member and former president of the Santa Barbara Rental Property Association. I like Eckert, by the way. I don't think Eckert's a horrible person, but the question that I have is, people always talk about the housing issues around here, and they talk about the issues people are having, and they're trying to figure out ways of solving those things, and I don't think it's quite clicking in their minds that what they're looking for right now is having somebody who knows a lot about housing, such as a landlord, sit down at a table with you and try to explain to the two of you why you're having this argument. It's not the same thing as, like there was a person at the Goleta City Council meeting last week who actually was arguing to Goleta City Council that they should be supporting AB-3 because we all need rent control. That person was just so uninformed, and so that's why I'd asked last week who brought her and who failed to tell her that she's not going to get rent control. Like, it's such a complicated problem, right? People also have been making the comment, well, why don't we fund the Isla Vista Tenants Union to do this? We like the Isla Vista Tenants Union. The Isla Vista Tenants Union mission is an organization serving the interests of Isla Vista tenants. They are not in a position to sit down at a table and mediate, because a mediator needs to be at least somewhat impartial. You might claim that the existing ones aren't, but the goal is that you're going to sit down and say, well, I understand your side, but do you not understand the other person's side? You should think about this. The Isla Vista Tenants Union's goal is to fight for the rights of tenants. You don't want the Isla Vista Tenants Union to say, well, tenant, have you seen his point? He just really wanted more rent, and he needed, So, I think it's also interesting to point out that how the Santa Barbara Tenant Mediation Task Force is funded in Santa Barbara, which has been kind of complicated. They've been mostly funded by community development block grants, And they've been having a difficult time keeping their funding. The same person, Nick Welsh, keeps having to write articles about this. In 2008, budget cuts hit housing mediation hard. 2011, rental mediation program under budget asks. 2012, council combs over wild hairs in budget deliberation, rental task force saved. So if cuts go through as opposed, this also gives you some concept of what the structure is internally of it. The mediation task force will, in fact, cease providing any mediation services at all. Currently, that function is provided by 15 volunteer mediators, all appointed by the city council who are paid nothing. 2 part-time employees who provide the mediators administrative support as contract labor rather than salaried staff would lose their jobs. The task force would be reduced to a glorified information hotline where landlords and tenants in legal distress about their respective rights and responsibilities could call. Office visits would no longer be allowed. Last year, the task force mediated 42 cases and handled 12,000 staff consultations. The year before that, it mediated 64 cases and fielded 1,400, I say 1,000, 1,200, and 1,400 consultations. Most calls come from tenants concerned about security deposits, evictions, or terminations of tenancy. Many involve disputes among tenants themselves. About 20% of the calls come from landlords. Again, numbers can be deceiving. And they did succeed in getting their money. And so now, so the most obvious winner was the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force, an orphan agency left stranded by cuts in federal funding. Responding to a major organizing push by task force supporters, the council voted to keep the task force fully funded at a cost of $64,000, rather than trim its functions back severely as initially proposed by City Administrator Jim Armstrong. With the additional general fund support, the task force, which for 36 years has helped settle disputes between landlords and tenants, will maintain an executive director and 3-member support staff. Had the cuts taken place as initially proposed, the 3 part-timers would have been given the axe, and the task force would no longer be able to provide the mediation services that its name suggests. Over the decades, the task force has operated largely thanks to federal funding via community development block grant money. Those funds have dried up in the past 2 years, and Armstrong and the council, facing serious budget constraints of their own, have been loath to take on new obligations. So I'm not necessarily trying to say anything specific about it. I think we've learned something about how the Rental Mediation Task Force internally operates. It's volunteers. It was funded by community development block grants. Now it's funded by the city general fund. I think it doesn't cost that much money, interestingly enough, but again, it's a lot of volunteers. I thought it would be a really easy idea. I guess that's one thing maybe just occurred to me. I thought it'd be kind of really easy to just hand Santa Barbara a bunch of money and say, can you scale up your services a little bit for us? But maybe it's not, because maybe the scaling up the volunteer staff isn't something, because they're not, it's not like they're hiring staff and doing full-time employees who are dealing with all of this. It's like, this is not how they work. So I've also looked into what people in Santa Barbara think about the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force, and I hope this means that Steve Wiley, in his opinion, is committed to putting as much energy into going after all the other terrible landlords in Santa Barbara. Their numbers are legion. What Santa Barbara needs is a mechanism for anonymously reporting these landlords and a regular inspection schedule, report or no report. Santa Barbara also needs a way to put a cheap printed summary of the habitability, security deposit, discrimination, and a few other laws into the hands of all prospective tenants. Maybe the Independent could print it once a year or quarterly. So it's interesting, even in Santa Barbara, where they have this thing, they're still complaining about landlords issues, and they're still wishing they had something that had more teeth that they just haven't voted in place for various reasons in Santa Barbara, because or maybe they don't have funding for it, I don't know. All right, Steve Lavignino, County Supervisor. The biggest thing that I'm concerned is I see a lot of students coming forward and saying that they feel that this is the answer, and I hope it is. But in my experience, I don't feel like this will be the panacea that you're all looking for. I don't think that this would give you the self-governance you're looking for. I think you'll be in the same position that we are. We want to provide the services, but we don't have enough revenue to do it. This is, again, another quote from the County Board of Supervisors last meeting. All right. So people have talked a lot about bringing things back to LAFCO and why they don't want to bring things back to LAFCO. And one of the things that had come up is protest votes, that if you bring things back to LAFCO and you do the full LAFCO process, essentially you could have people who own a lot of land trying to shut down the whole thing. As far as I can tell, that's not true, by the way. I actually was somebody who was saying this a long time at the very beginning of this whole thing back in October. I was also I was something about protest votes. I remember saying something about it. I don't know. So I've been spending a lot of time recently looking into a lot of laws related to just Cortese Knox in general, protest votes in particular. So the protest vote mechanism is, first of all, tends to be is really complicated. It tends to be bifurcated a little bit based on whether you're an uninhabited or inhabited territory. And by the way, this is a great quote from a LAFCO meeting back a couple of years ago. Actually, no, it was a while. It was a few years ago. Maybe it wasn't that one. But that Janet Wolf was confused about the fact that we were talking about uninhabited territory, but clearly there was somebody living there who was actually speaking to her at that moment. Why are we talking about uninhabited territory? And Braitman at the time explained that uninhabited is merely it's an artifact of the law. It means that fewer than 12 people live there. So if you have an uninhabited territory where you have fewer than 12 people living there, then landowners owning 50% or more of the assessed value of the land in the territory can do a protest vote. In the case of inhabited territory, 50% or more of the registered voters within the territory. It's not landowners anymore. If you actually have an inhabited area, it's registered voters. Or if you have a landowner voter district, which as far as I know we are not, 50% or more of the voting power of the voters entitled to vote. 50% or more of the registered voters within the territory of an inhabited territory. By the way, that's a majority vote if you read it to the people. I mean, it doesn't sound at all scary when you look at it, I think, this way. And really, what is the goal of a protest vote? The goal of a protest vote is to cause a vote. If a majority protest exists in accordance with Section 57078, then the Commission shall terminate proceedings. That's the next slide. So if you've got something that's a majority vote, then clearly a majority protest should shut it down just to not waste your time running the vote. You've already established that 50% of the registered voters don't want this. We don't need a vote. If no majority protest exists, then the alternative is to have it go to the voters. In the case of any reorganization or change of organization, a majority protest shall be deemed to exist, and the proposed change of organization or reorganization shall be terminated if the Commission finds that written protest filed and not withdrawn prior to the conclusion of the hearing representing the following against. This is to demonstrate this is actually the current law. So I look at this. This is where it really gets confusing. So the good, the bad, and the confusing. Current protest requirements of the Cortez-Knox-Hertzberg Local Government Reorganization Act of 2000. This was written in 2009. That's very important. So in 2009, they spent a lot of time trying to explain, because there were actually multiple clauses that all conflicted with each other that said notwithstanding and almost in loops. And so they came up with what they actually like. And did I put here? This was the LAFCO actually put out a white paper of how they're interpreting this. So an election shall only be held if the Commission finds either of the following. In the case of inhabited territory, at least 25% of the landowners within the territory subject to consolidation or reorganization who own at least 25% of the assessed value of land within the territory. So what is this? This is just showing that most of the time the protest, there's many different protest votes. Most of the time the goal of protest votes is to cause a vote. Whereas if you have something that is a consolidation or particular kinds of reorganization, normally LAFCO can just kind of do that. Unless you protest, in which case they have to go to the people. The protest doesn't stop it. The protest means that you actually have to have the vote of the people. And by the way, if you have, I think this one's for, so the Commission shall do either of the following. They will either order the reorganization subject to confirmation of the voters, or they will do it without an election. Like neither of these two options here is not do it at all. They fixed it, though. In 2012, they actually did a law that tried to fix all of the loops, and they made all of the laws more like clear. And now it really just comes down to the stuff that I saw at the very beginning, which is essentially if the protest comes back and proves that a vote is irrelevant, then you don't do the thing. And they also made it very clear now, if a change of organization consists of an incorporation, such as for a city, a protest proceeding shall not be conducted. The case of a cityhood through LAFCO, there isn't even an opportunity for that. All right, cityhood through LAFCO. Goleta cityhood, 2001 through LAFCO. Here are the boundaries that ended up happening. Many of us are very unhappy about these boundaries. You'll note that the boundaries do not include, I'll just stop over there, right? They were actually examining a large number of different boundaries. The LAFCO staff recommended Goleta incorporation boundaries. So this part of the presentation, by the way, is trying to address all the people who really hate LAFCO. All right. So they were looking at, they had said, okay, well, Goleta now put forward a proposal for the green area. Goleta now didn't really want anything else. And so LAFCO was like, well, wait a second. I don't know if you can just do that. Like, what about IV, and what about this land that's like directly across the street from like a major street that like, I mean, who's even in charge of the street anymore? This area over here, they actually, I think B ended up actually voted that they considered themselves not part of the same people. But they actually ended up over the course of time adding in C, adding in E, not adding in D, deciding that F, which is Vinoco, should continue to be included, and Goleta will have to try to deal with them, which has been fun at the planning commission meetings recently. When they first got this forward to them, they had a big meeting. So the difficulty of this, by the way, so all the staff reports from LAFCO at the time were essentially written by Braitman. They were written by Braitman and Associates, it's a consulting company that worked for LAFCO. So LAFCO didn't actually have staff. LAFCO hired a consulting company to handle all their staff. The difficulty of the Commission's decision in choosing appropriate boundaries is underscored by the conflicting comments received from residents, many in the same neighborhood, such as, I don't think Goleta should be a separate city. Goleta is way overdue for cityhood. I would support cityhood only if IV is excluded from the Goleta cityhood. A city of Goleta makes no sense if areas of Goleta are excluded, and that goes for Isla Vista as well. I would not vote for the new city if Isla Vista weren't part of it. Isla Vista UCSB, including Isla Vista and UCSB in the proposed city is a significant boundary issue, at least based upon the testimony and correspondence that has been received by the Commission. In light of comments from the county administrator, the staff recommends Module B, consisting of Isla Vista and UCSB, be analyzed in the final CFA as an alternative city boundary. In recognition of the close relationship between IV and UCSB, if the Commission does not ultimately include Module B in the city, the staff feels that there should be a local government structure accommodating both IV and the university. It may be appropriate to consider, in conjunction with the county, UCSB, and IVRPD, an alternative government structure. It is recommended the staff be authorized to consult with these agencies. All right, so this is kind of near the beginning of the process. They ended up including Bacara, Vinoco, Glen Annie, and various things here. The Commission directed the staff to include within the CFA analysis a third incorporation boundary, including only IV and UCSB, because they wanted to deal with that. That's what we just learned. And they continued to say, hey, can we check out IV2? Essentially, Goleta now is pushing really strongly for not checking IV2. And LAFCO kept saying, I also want to see IV. So negotiated revenue neutrality agreement. This is, I was really curious about the revenue neutrality agreement. I managed to find the board actions from the County Board of Supervisors dealing with the revenue neutrality. The revenue negotiation teams, county staff, and the chief proponents were placed in an unusual situation by LAFCO. Typically, the negotiations would focus on a single option advocated by the incorporation proponents. In the case of Goleta, LAFCO asked the agreements be developed for both the Goleta Now proposal and the second option, adding IV UCSB. The proponents have long argued not to include UCSB IV in the proposal, and understandably were reluctant to participate in the development of an agreement which included Module B. In discussing the situation with the LAFCO staff, it was decided to negotiate the agreement for A, and then LAFCO staff and county staff would apply the same components. Essentially, Goleta Now is like, I'm not even going to negotiate with you. I'm going to blackball the entire process that ends up dealing with IV and involved in Goleta, making it really difficult for anyone to get any of the information they actually needed in order to determine anything. LAFCO asked that the CFA and revenue neutrality discussions contemplate a second option of Module A plus B. This would add UCSB and IV with Module A. As previously described, county staff and the proponents did not negotiate a specific revenue neutrality agreement for this option. However, the agreement for Module A is designed in such a way as it can be readily applied to an AB configuration. The provisions in this agreement are applicable to this option. No LAFCO panel, this by the way is from News Press, sorry. This is from a News Press article. No LAFCO panel in California has ever simultaneously considered competing Cityhood plans, says Bill Chat, County Director of Organizational Effectiveness. They're breaking new ground. All right, so Goleta Now, why were they so against this? So the figures hide the financial superiority, actually. So Goleta plus IV was actually financially more sound than Goleta by itself. But Goleta Now is like the figures hide the financial superiority of the original Goleta Now plan after the city's 10th birthday, according to a statement the commission is to receive at today's session. The Goleta Now plan calls for city boundaries that essentially take the 93117 zip code area of the western Goleta Valley, but leaves out UCSB and IV. And which I should have marked these better. First test in this case to decide proposed FOOP, in other words, process. This I think is still News Press. There is, for example, the issue of Isla Vista, which is conspicuously omitted in the latest Cityhood proposal. Opponents of such an omission are already speaking out and probably will continue their objections at the public hearings. It should be remembered that incorporation attempts in the past that included IV were either defeated by voters or the proposal never made it to the ballot. Staff recommendation, back to LAFCO. The defining factor for the staff is community identity, which is a perception of those who reside within various portions of the Goleta Valley. On this basis, the staff recommends that UCSB IV not be included in the incorporation at this time. We therefore recommend. Again, this is Braden. There are legitimate differences as to whether IV UCSB is a separate community from the remainder of Goleta Valley or can even be considered a separate urban area. This is the opposite, right? They can even be considered separate. The staff has read official documents that portray the area both ways. The decision on the incorporation boundaries rests with the commission, and the staff recommends that the initial city of Goleta not include IV and UCSB. Although the commission has requested a position on this matter from the university and the regents of the UC system, no response has been received. Doesn't this sound wonderfully familiar? More of that in a little bit. So, this, by the way, yes, the LAFCO staff. So this, by the way, Harry Nelson, for those of you who know Harry Nelson, has been in a couple of these meetings. He wrote the two opinion pieces for the News Press. There's one I'm pretty certain he wrote. The News Press actually deleted a lot of the bylines on a lot of their old archived articles, which makes me really sad. So the LAFCO staff have done a poor job in giving accurate information to LAFCO, so the recommendation that IV be omitted from Goleta lacks the force of reason. In California, horrible consequences have resulted from the omission of urban areas from adjacent cities in East Palo Alto and East Los Angeles. The Commission owes it to Goleta to base its decision on Goleta boundaries on facts and concern for the well-being of the larger community, not on the misinformation and fears of extremists. Okay, back to news press. Deciding that it is the big task, said County Supervisor Gail Marshall, whose district covers the Goleta Valley's western half, which the group Goleta now proposes for cityhood. The boundary issue has always been the most volatile in Goleta's long history of failed self-determination efforts. Arguments over what areas to include or leave out led to community rifts so deep that cityhood attempts in 86, 90, and 93 failed. The same hurdle now faces the plan by Goleta now. Which brings us to more articles given to me by Lanny back from 1987. Goleta cityhood fails, with all 43 precincts reporting 66.6% opposed Measure Q, which was a combined Goleta-Isla Vista, while 33.4% voted in favor of incorporation. Charles Eckert, a Goleta attorney who almost single-handedly led a campaign against Measure Q, expressed satisfaction with the result. But I don't even think it's fair to actually pin this on him. This is from AB-3 Press. After 3 hours hearing, AS endorses no on Q. The UCSB Associated Students Ledge Council voted 14-1 to oppose Measure Q at their September 30th meeting after a 3-hour, often acrimonious debate. We can see that there were votes that were being done, plebiscites in the community who said that they wanted to see a city of IV, not a combined city with Goleta. And so, by the way, this is not where the lines cross. This is where they touch temporarily, 50-50, and then go back towards city of IV at the top. A 1986 vote turned out 2-1 in favor of an independent city. So let's look at UCSB for a second. And so, I love you, George. I'm not complaining. I appreciate. You weren't even here. You weren't even here. So, UCSB position regarding its inclusion or exclusion from the city of Goleta back in 2001. Despite being approached by the Commission's Goleta Ad Hoc Committee, the university has not indicated its position as to whether the university property should or should not be included in the proposed city of Goleta. The Commission could decline to include UCSB in the final CFA without its request, or at least its consent. University opposition to the incorporation, after it is approved by LAFCO, could have an adverse effect in the incorporation process. Like, essentially, you can imagine a scenario where they said, okay, well, we'll include UCSB in IV. And then UCSB finally gets around to saying they don't want it. Well, now we've kind of screwed this proposal that we were trying to get through. Whereas on the other side, if we just, UCSB never asked for it, let's leave UCSB out. Oh, well, that actually will at least allow this to succeed. I can sort of appreciate the thought process that's going behind some of the stuff in LAFCO, with at least some of it. We'll get to. All right. Back to, this is, I think, IV Free Press. In 1984, the cityhood question and related issues led to a cutoff of funding to the IVCC from both county and UCSB. So I actually finally found a reference for this that from around the same time, because I've been kind of saying this for a long time, and everyone's like, yeah, that's kind of what I heard too. But like, this is actually from like an article written in 1987, just a few years later. All right, so now this is if we had a bunch of IVRPD people here, which we don't. We only have we don't even have 2 anymore. Jacob left. Yeah, and in fact, I'm not even really saying it. I'm talking about things that IVRPD said in 1987. I'm not talking about anything current.
I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I was there, but I wasn't on the board.
So in 2000, actually a little bit in 2001.
2001, I was there.
Yeah, does that matter? Do you delete?
Oh no, I don't.
Okay.
have to
All right.
leave.
Good. Okay. I was asked by Dave. I was asked by
I
Dave.
have to lead an Ivy cityhood thing,
Yeah.
you guys, so hard.
Yes, I was asked by
hard.
Dave specifically to add markers around, like to try to consolidate anything I said about IVRPD and add markers around it in case he was here, so that I'd be able to like have him step outside temporarily and then have him come back in. So if Module B is included in the proposed city, the staff recommends that IVRPD be concurrently dissolved and its assets and liabilities transferred to the new city or be converted to a subsidiary district governed by the City Council. Either action can be included in the Commission's resolution approving the incorporation. If the Commission includes Module B in the final CFA, the study should be based on the assumption that the IVRPD will dissolve, with its assets and liabilities transferred to the new city, or that it will be converted to a subsidiary district governed by the City Council. The staff discussed this matters with representatives of the district. We are informed that the district's preference, taken by official board action, is to remain as an independent agency within the new city, and to strongly oppose either being dissolved or converted to a subsidiary district. Now, that means that there was an option, which was construct a city of Goleta and IV and then leave IVRPD separate, running only half of the city. Or there's this this is another contention that ended up occurring between the people at LAFCO who were trying to figure this out and the community. All right, so let's go back. So let's go to 1987. Vote no on Measure Q. But let IV and the Goleta be separate, we're certainly not equal. The Local Agency Formation Commission, LAFCO, has refused to allow the people of Goleta and IV-UCSB their constitutionally protected right to vote to decide on separate incorporation of the ballot box. Instead, LAFCO has decided to accept the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors' proposal to incorporate IV-UCSB and Goleta into one city. No legally sufficient petition from the people has ever been submitted calling for the combined incorporation of these two economically, politically, and demographically distinct communities. The current substandard level of county services will be maintained whether the voters approve this proposal or not. Only through the separate incorporation of Goleta and IV-UCSB will there be any increases in service levels to the two communities. Michael E. Boyd, Director, IV Recreation and Parks.
Can you just copy and paste for his comments on the Nexus now?
Yeah. It's quite true. Copican, this is the same article earlier from IV Free Press about, I think this is the same one about AS, and so there was a bunch of arguments that were happening. Copican accused the Measure Q opponents who were associated with the Park District of being a clique who wanted to defeat Q in order to protect and promote their own little fiefdom. I've heard this fiefdom term get thrown around recently as well. In response, Glenn Lazoff, Measure Q opponent and general manager of the Park District, pointed out that the Park District would remain in existence even if Measure Q passes, because at the time they weren't even going to be dissolved in that way. And so it's it was a bad argument. It really was just that the people who were there wanted IV to be a separate thing, and that's what AS wanted IV to be a separate thing. And people were arguing IV should be a separate thing, and that caused Cityhood to fail in '87. So I can kind of appreciate why, when people were now coming to the problem again in 2000, why this was such a contentious problem of, we've tried this a bunch of times before, and we keep failing when we put IV and UCSB in the Goleta boundaries. Maybe we need to actually think through this harder. UCSB is not going to comment on it, and IVRPD is still going to be irritating about it. So GAIN, Goleta's Against Incorporation Now, Eckert member, which formed July 15th under the direction of Charles Eckert, a Goleta attorney, picked up 17 members Monday night for a new total of 53, Eckert said. Although made up of diverse membership, GAIN as an organization has no formal agenda, Eckert said, other than the defeat of Measure Q, the county-supported Goleta IV Cityhood plan that he characterized Monday as county blackmail. But two major backers of GAIN's anti-Cityhood campaign, the IV Recreation Park District and the Committee for Greater Santa Barbara, were already looking ahead Monday night. Glenn Lazoff, general manager of the IV Recreation and Park District, said he personally supports a separate incorporation of Isla Vista, although others in the community might have different ideas. Young Eckert.
Just as a comment, you'll notice in that first full paragraph, yours truly mentioned.
Oh, yeah. The Committee for Greater Santa Barbara's Lenny Ebenstein pointed most of his
1987.
time talking up support. I got all of these newspaper clippings that are related to Cityhood attempts. I got all of those from Lenny. I got all the housing ones from Constance, and the Free Press stuff I got from the UCSB archives. Glenn Lazoff, general manager of IV Recreation Park District, said he personally supports the separate incorporation of IV, although others in the community might have different ideas. There's nothing wrong with the city being diverse, but we're not talking about diversity, Lazoff said, of the current Goleta IV Cityhood plan, scheduled to be voted on as a ballot measure during the November 3 election. We're talking about polarity. Lazoff and Eckert say Goletans and Isla Vistans are distinct in both their cultural and political character, and the two communities differ structurally. IVRPD, please return. If people are outside, we can now come back in. Okay. All right, the question of IV being part of a new city has ripped the community apart. In 2 elections, Cityhood has failed, with the major issue being what to do with UCSB and IV. I think it's really important we get a city, Marshall said. Gail Marshall, again, county supervisor and member of LAFCO. We have a very good chance. We can go with a city that makes the most sense, which would include IV, or we can go with the political reality. It's very much an open question right now. Seems to come down to a question of what's doable, remarked Jim Farr, who supports the Goleta Now plan. Even though his home in northern Goleta would be left out of the new city, we should be concentrating on what is a politically feasible city boundary. He added, in an ideal world, all the area west of Santa Barbara should be and would be part of the city of Goleta. Since that's not realistic, Farr said, we need to at least start with the core city from which we could grow by annexing additional areas in later years. In contrast, several IV residents and activists urged that the fiscal analysis also consider including UCSB and IV in their combined population of about 27,000. My biggest concern is that in all this is that Isla Vista will be left as an island, said Sagin Sutar, a board member of the IV Recreation Parks District. Isla Vista is lost if we don't become part of the city of Goleta, she asserted, because the college community would then have very few other options for municipal representation, which leads us to islands. So LAFCO claims that they're not constructing an island, which is an interesting back and forth, I think. When applied to LAFCO proceedings, the term island has a specific legal meaning. There have been some arguments that LAFCO cannot exclude areas such as IV from the proposed city because they would create islands. This is not a correct statement, again, says Braitman, staff. So he claimed that unless you are completely surrounded by a city or an ocean, like if there's only one city you're surrounded by, like essentially imagine you've got a city and there's like a little hole in the middle. They call that an island. If you have two cities that meet at a boundary, then there's a hole in between them. That's not considered an island. For purposes of the law, the ocean is considered a like a no man's land, like land that doesn't exist. So if you have one city that touches, encapsulates an area that's now set aside by ocean, you are considered an island. But if you have two cities, which Braitman argues the city of Santa Barbara's airport sits there and touches us, then you are not an island. So, and he also claims you can waive the restrictions if it finds the application of the restriction to be detrimental to the orderly development of the community and that the area would be enclosed by the annexation and incorporation is so located cannot reasonably be annexed. Therefore, land located between two cities or surrounded by two cities in the ocean is not an island. It will, Module B will not be an unincorporated island if it is surrounded by a proposed city of the Pacific Ocean, the city of Santa Barbara. All right, so now we get Harry. I think this is Harry Nelson. It sounds a little bit like him. It had like a really good writing style. There was no byline on it. It was an opinion piece. I think that's, and then, actually, no, wait a second. No, actually, no. I've got something from Harry that I don't, this one I know is from Harry. The top I know is from Harry. An earlier LAFCO report suggests IV could be annexed to Santa Barbara, which owns the airport. In fact, the state restricts Santa Barbara's uses of airport land, and use for residential annexation is never mentioned in these laws. IV is separated from the airport by the Goleta Slough, which at the time of California's admission to the U.S. was part of the Pacific Ocean. By LAFCO's criteria, exclusion of IV creates an island, contrary to the intent of state cityhood law. And they actually got into an argument in staff reports. Braitman wrote a new staff report for another LAFCO meeting arguing Harry Nelson stated that annexing IV into the city of Santa Barbara would be illegal due to terms and conditions of the grant of tidelands and submerged lands from the state of California to the city of Santa Barbara that was accomplished by Chapter 193. We do not agree. The reference sections make it clear that limitations on the use of properties described in and conveyed by the statute apply to the city and its successors. Thus, the statute does not prevent successor forms of government from taking ownership of the land. More to the point of annexation, the boundaries of the city of Santa Barbara that include the Santa Barbara Airport are valid. The land was annexed legally, and there have been validating acts adopted by the legislature that would have cured any procedure defects. The assessor, surveyor, and state board of equalization recognize and utilize this boundary for assessment and tax rate area purposes. As a result of the city annexing the airport property, UCSB and by extension IV are contiguous and can therefore be annexed to the city of Santa Barbara. Okay, so that's the one place I can totally appreciate people being like, well, maybe LAFCO screwed us by essentially constructing an island in this way. But now I'm going to say who was actually on LAFCO at the time. We had Commissioner John Fox, Bob Orak, a bunch of other people. Fox opposed. He voted against the Goleta without IV plan. He's one of the only two members who's still on LAFCO at this point. And Bob Orak is the other one. And John is currently an alternate, which means he usually doesn't even get to vote. If you really think that LAFCO in 2001 was a horrible, horrible thing, they've completely replaced their staff. They now have got internal staff. They don't contract out. Braitman's no longer involved. All of the commissioners, except for these two, and one of them in this room who's been very friendly to us and who voted against the thing we didn't like, was I just don't think it's fair to keep going to LAFCO and saying, I hate LAFCO, I'm afraid of LAFCO, LAFCO is going to screw us like they've screwed us every other time before. I don't think LAFCO has screwed us. LAFCO put forward the 1987 Goleta plus IV that got shot down. LAFCO scrambled in the 2001 time. All right. Salute Carbajal. We all know that forming a city in Isla Vista is likely infeasible because of the tax base. It has been kicked around in the past. When the city of Goleta was formed, it purposely left out Isla Vista. There are some challenges with the amount of resources it needs to actually become a city, which brings us to maybe the main event, which is staring at these financial feasibility reports. So on the back of every one of these sheets of paper, by the way, is a bunch of road revenue, which is largely irrelevant. And so I think it's interesting to point this out. So there's this massive amount of money that comes from something called Measure D. Measure D had a sunset provision, and it needed to get 2/3 of the vote, and it got 63.5% of the vote in like its best case scenario. So Measure D doesn't exist, which means that we don't get Measure D road funds anymore. So all of those line items get crossed off. And that actually, you'll note in the Isla Vista version, this is Goleta plus IV, the road fund, they just had such an insane amount of extra money at the end of this whole process, $14 million at the end of 10 years. All right. So what I did is I took the comprehensive fiscal analyses from the 2001 Cityhood report, and I kind of stacked them next to each other on this thing. But of course, you can barely read it because it's small text on a number, and so I also handed it all to you. What you have before you, the first three sheets, are the economic and planning systems. That's the consulting company that we've hired. incorporation analysis, first for Goleta. Second page is for Goleta plus Isla Vista. Third page is for Isla Vista. Continuing past there, I have found more APS reports that are all in gloriously the exact same format. So I have the Castro Valley and then La Jolla. I actually have some more that are not quite in the same format, so I didn't print them all out. But the ones that were all in identically the same format, it's so glorious, I kind of printed them all so you can kind of compare various things. Things that I think are kind of interesting. So people have pointed out, people have pointed out, actually I just skipped to here, that Goleta plus IV was making a lot more money than Goleta alone. And one of the claims in the news press, which I heard, the difference is largely because the state returns 3 times the usual amount of local revenues to a new city for 7 years based on the number of registered voters.
Yeah.
Based on what I can tell from looking at the finances, it's actually because they managed to get a small amount of money at the beginning and then compound interest. So because they never needed to spend much of their money, they put the money into investment earnings. And if you look at the second sheet of paper versus the first sheet of paper, in year 10, they're making $1.2 million a year in investment earnings, whereas they're only making 1/10 that in the Goleta proposal alone. So I actually don't, and I think that actually accounts for a lot of the difference, really. So I actually don't think that the statements everyone was making about why that was the case are even accurate. Something that I thought was really interesting, like when I'm looking at these things, is always looking at like why are the amount of money that's specified for these things the amount of money they specified. So they've got city attorney, they've got us spending the same amount if we are Goleta plus IV, or IV alone, which is on the order of $6 to $7 or even more $100,000 a year. So Breitman explained that that's 3 times the amount for a standard city the same size. They were trying to be conservative about things, and so what was great about he was able to make that argument is people were like, well, Goleta might not be viable, and he's like, well, this is just ludicrously expensive what they spec. But I think that also affects the feasibility of something like Isla Vista. So the police budget's on here. It's got a giant number associated with it. You might wonder where it's coming from. I thought I actually had. Okay, somewhere, maybe it's right here. Another shortcoming is the study's failure to include Sheriff's Department labor agreement, minimize city. Okay, but somewhere they actually asked the Sheriff's Office how much money they were spending, and they used a 2001 budget, which may or may not have been the best choice. And so a lot of people think that this number's too small. But they also supposedly included other police-related expenses that turned out to not be needed, and they feel that the litigation budget that's in here is sufficient. They actually looked at that, but people can disagree. Planning zoning. The planning zoning budget they included is for a massive planning department. The Goleta planning department, they've got $2.2 million. Goleta plus IV, $2.6 million. They've got $1.3 million a year that they're talking about for the planning department for IV alone. I don't really think that the county is doing that much work for us planning. The experience that when I've talked to business owners in the area who've gone to the planning department, the answer they always get back is, I don't know, do stuff. It's like they don't, and then to the extent to which there's supposed to be processes for doing things, they get referred to Doreen. Like, I don't know, go talk to Doreen at coffee with the supervisor and try to figure out, maybe she can help you. It's like the planning department's for it. It's just kind of, yeah. And the thing that I think is, there's like this line that I swear is just broken. So they've got, okay, so one of the things that's funny about these reports is that they start at mid-year. So they've got a birth date for the city. And so there are some things that are still run by the county through the course of the first year. And others that only shift over at the end of the year. And some things that start at the beginning of the year. So this first column, which is 2001, 2002 part, is usually either 1, a percentage of the second column, 2, identical to the second column for a reasonably fixed fee, or 3, 0. Those are the 3 options. Mm-hmm. If you look at, that's true of everything, including the mitigation payments that you'd be paying to the county, until you get to the Isla Vista one. And the Isla Vista one claims that somehow we're going to get $1.1 million of mitigation payment to us the first part of the year. And then every subsequent year, we're going to be paying back to the county $951,000, which doesn't make any sense at all to me. So I talked to EPS. I was like, how did you make this thing? Like, there's a bunch of numbers in here that I swear that are just the same as the other numbers, or that just got broken. And they told me, like, they just subtracted the other ones that kind of did some fix-ups. They weren't really contracted to do this one very well. They did this as an afterthought side project. And so I don't really think that we can trust the numbers here either way. So by the way, when I say either way, like I get to the point where I'm looking at this, like I just feel like I don't know, But like when I say I don't know that it's not feasible, and I don't know that it is feasible. Every time Cityhood comes up, there's this knee-jerk reaction. Well, of course, Cityhood isn't feasible because of its 2001 numbers that I just swear are just so weirdly broken. So they were the city hall that they were allocating for this. They were going to have enough space for 48 people. So the city hall then for Goleta plus IV, and IV are all like on the order of $400,000 to $500,000 a year. If you think about the amount of office space that you can rent around here for that, I mean, if you think about like, okay, what are we really trying to obtain with the board that we're trying to get and the services we're taking on, you can rent a lot of office for over $500,000 a year. They're essentially they're not looking at this, I think, in a fair light, and I think that really comes actually. Okay, hold that thought in your mind for a second, because then we're going to watch what EPS does for these other ones. All right. So revenue neutrality mitigation payments, terms and conditions in revenue neutrality agreement as approved by the incorporation proponents of the County Board of Supervisors apply specifically to option 1, because that's the only thing that was negotiated. All of the mitigation payments for option 2 were extrapolated, and therefore what they did for option 3 is garbage. Okay. So here's where the sheriff's office came up. We were looking here unanticipated overtime from significant events. Halloween event, 85,000, 90,000. This, by the way, is from like 2004 report from the sheriff's office. As a percentage of the total budget that they were failing to anticipate, this actually isn't that large. I mean, this is like 5% of the total budget we're talking about. We're not talking about like the budget suddenly gets doubled in comparison to what EPS says. So I feel like people talk about the like the budget numbers coming from the sheriff's office as being awkward or wrong in various ways. The sheriff's office actually seems to be getting kind of close, considering their total budget, by the way, is $135 million for the county. And they were essentially talking to the county about, we were short 100,000 here and 90,000 there, and these various like sub-projects. Unanticipated,
yes,
right.
So they still had anticipated revenue.
Right, but now my point is that the anticipated numbers that they were essentially basing the EPS reports off of are on the order of 20 times the differences here. And so like I'm just saying that like it's not, I think like sometimes I feel like people look at the police numbers and are like, it could be like twice this. Like, I don't think it can be like twice this. It could be like maybe 20% more than this. But we're not going to look at like, it's suddenly millions of dollars off, because the sheriff's office actually apparently is somewhat okay at doing their internal budget analysis. All right, so now we're going to look at some of these other places. So I gave you the EPS report for Castro Valley. And by the way, if the end of a horrible side effect of this is that some of you might come out of this wondering about EPS doing anything. But so here we've got Castro Valley with a population of 61,000 people, 16 square miles of area, and we're looking at the amount that they're spending on City Hall is much less. I mean, it's $50,000. I guess that was not much less. The amount they're spending on planning is infinitely less. I mean, it's like we were spending $1.6 million or $1.5 million. They're spending around $500,000, like $600,000. They're charging less for all of the employees. Part of the reason that they did a thing where the employees in Santa Barbara cost a lot, and so they were assuming like he'd be hiring a bunch of people from around here at a high cost of living, and so they kind of took that into account. So I ended up learning about what was going on with that. But they did like the city attorneys that Braden was saying. Oftentimes you end up contracting out or end up doing it a lot cheaper. That they still all of these other incorporations that they did, the numbers end up just being drastically different than the kinds of numbers that you end up seeing for the numbers that they ended up doing for Goleta IV. And again, here's like a population of 42,000 area with a including supplies and everything, drastically cheaper City Hall. Okay. And then what was this one for? Recently incorporated cities have not fared well. Yes, this is a complaint about these things in general, which is in some ways a defense of EPS. Recently incorporated cities have not fared well compared to their CFAs. Response, Braitman writes this. 2 specific cities were mentioned by members of the Commission or public as having fiscal difficulties compared to CFA projections, were the cities of Rancho Santa Margarita in Orange County and Oakley in Contra Costa County. On an April 16th memorandum from Jim McClure in the County Administrative Office to County Council states, I compared EPS CFA to the actual budget of Santa Margarita, and the good news is revenues were higher, expenditures were lower, and surplus was greater. Mike Oliver, city manager of Oakley, reports that projected CFA revenues have proven to be accurate, while actual expenditures are higher than projected, primarily due to higher salaries. This condition should not be a factor for the Goleta Incorporation, since Santa Barbara area salary schedules rather than statewide averages were used in revised analysis. Nevertheless, the city of Oakley has accumulated a $5 million reserve fund. As noted by Walter Kaiser in the April 26th hearing, new cities are able to make adjustments to alter expenditures and programs based on actual budgetary experience. Another thing that I've brought up about these various comments people have made about like it not being feasible, EPS was not charged with looking at how to make it feasible. EPS was just charged to look at whether it was feasible. And so this is something where, I mean, the CSD is de facto not feasible because you can't have a CSD without money if you use the same approach. You need to give it money. You give it money by establishing a tax. So we can actually see what they did for these other incorporations. Incorporation of East Los Angeles. The new city of East Los Angeles does not generate sufficient revenues to cover projected operating costs unless anticipated revenues are augmented, e.g. by an increase in the existing utility users tax. Castro Valley can be financially feasible as a city contingent on implementation of a transient occupancy tax and an ongoing utility users tax, because the county was about to get rid of their utility users tax. And so the idea is we'll become a city, keep the utility users tax. Like, they were thinking out of the box on these, trying to figure out how to make a city viable by looking at the tax options that were available to them. And this then comes back to what I've been saying for a while now, which is that I wish that a little bit more out of the box thinking than just a few of us who are like really trying to get cities to work would be applied towards getting a city to work, because we've had a lot of out of the box thinking applied to getting a CSD to work. Maybe now we don't need all that out of the box thinking working on AB-3 for a while. We can apply that out of the box thinking to our alternatives, to getting CSA-31 and figuring out how to fix it right now and get some money for a MAC or something, trying to look at maybe we can make a city viable. I'm currently intending to continue plunging forward and trying to get the property tax information to see. I've been told that property taxes in the area have increased in a reasonable way, and that might be wrong. I myself have arguments for why it might be wrong. Due to, in 2010, there was Santa Barbara County went around and proactively decreased assessments on a bunch of properties because there was a housing crash temporarily. But at the same time, I can also find a bunch of references for buildings in the area that didn't exist and have been built up and they have their values increased. I've done some initial calculations, and I could see going in either way. And so that's what I'm waiting back on EPS to hear from that. And my intention is I hear back from that, continue looking at numbers, try to look at the numbers with other people who are interested in trying to get the things that only a city can provide that I think would be helpful for us, and then continue down a path towards asking LAFCO, whom I don't hate, in order to see if we can get a city. But yeah, that's all right. Back to supervisor lighting. I'm not against self-governance in Isla Vista. I would love for you to become your own city if it were feasible, but we don't know if it's feasible or not because we haven't done a feasibility study. Just like we don't know if the CSD will work because we haven't done a feasibility study.
You were like always so good at ending perfectly on the minute.